academic points. In the early 20th century, Sir Saraswati Ranbakshi, a barrister, quits the post of Chief Secretary to the Maharaja of Kashinagar owing to a court intrigue. He relocates with his young family to Mirzapur on the banks of the Ganga. Sir Saraswati is a typically upper middle class man of his generation, an Anglophile who is much impressed by all things British, but also deeply rooted in his own culture. On the one hand, he successfully resists the machinations of the British to annex the kingdom of Kashinagar, and on the other, employs British governesses for his daughters. The schism within him runs deep. As the novel progresses into the turbulent 30s and 40s, he inclines more and more towards the Indian national movement, something to which his wife Savitri has always been tacitly sympathetic. Savitri is a traditional woman. She is a mother and homemaker par excellence, whose life centers around her husband and children. She is untouched by Western mores. The burden of carrying and transmitting tradition, culture and values has always been laid upon the women, and Savitri exemplifies this. Brown Sahibs may have been abundant during the Raj, but brown Mem Sahibs came into existence only after the British left, and Savitri's story comes to end much before that. The problems in Savitri's meek existence arise from her 3 children and their wayward affections. The British governess, Mrs. Muddleton, probably privately described Manika, the eldest, as a handful. Bold and headstrong, she has an affair with the fancy-free collector of Mirzapur, Larry Stevens, with unfortunate results. She chooses the man she wants to marry herself, but is sadly disillusioned, and returns to her parental home a widow with a small son and in considerable trouble, but scarcely chastened and subdued. Insofar as she is a woman who makes her own choices, she may be considered as the prototype of a feminist. Her younger sister, Sita, is quite a foil to Manika, being timid and docile. She gets engaged to Rajeshwar, the Raja of Behrampur, though initially her family is against the match. In a way, both the Ranbakshi girls are victims of circumstance. Their education has taught them to be independent and self-reliant, but they are trapped in a traditional society where such independence is frowned upon. The men they marry are the wrong ones, but given the Mofussil society of Mirzapur, how are they to acquire the discrimination that would have enabled them to choose better? In a way, perhaps they are torn between the conflicting cultural values of their parents. Yogesh, the tailor's needle himself, does better. He too is educated at home and is overshadowed by his father, who has directed most of his life. He also knuckles under his more assertive older sister Manika. He asserts his independence, much like his sister, in the realm of the affections. Sir Larry Stevens, the collector, in fact presents a very interesting conflict. He is the main figure in Mirzapur, but he is led up the garden path, as it were, by Manika, who manages to get him married to a woman he's already had an affair with. And before I end my this brief character sketch, I would like to say something about the technique which has been suggested to me by the author himself. The novel has used many techniques, and as Professor Parmar pointed out, it's a novel of manners at a certain level. It's a Raj novel at another level. But the point which the author wants to be underlined is that it uses the technique of magic realism. And this is something which I must again read out. Novels must use some form of realism in narration. The Tailor's Needle uses something close to magical realism, a technique in which some of the most unrealistic happenings are woven into the plot and presented with a straight face as though they could definitely happen in the real world. The way all the marriages happen in the novel is the best example of this. Manika's own marriage to Mohan illustrates this point. She decides which of the guests at her cousin's wedding she will marry and manages to make the man of her choice her bridegroom. She discovers, however, that she is a second wife. The sudden arrival of a Maharaja into the world of the Ranbakshi family and then his taking Sita as his wife is somewhat like a fairy story relationship that ends in a marriage. The novel constantly balances the real world with the magical, and the second part of the novel works according to the curse of a fakir. Meneka's life until she becomes a widow may be traced back to the fact that a fakir has cursed her, though one hardly feels that in the narrative. The novel contains an actual magic show in which a British magician manages to make a French woman lay an egg when she clucks like a hen. There is a sannyasi who can give up his life at will. The interesting thing is that the reader never feels during the narration that any kind of violation of realism is going on, and that in fact the whole plot is a result of things far from real. The British Viceroy, with his unduly long name, adds to the charm of the romantic setting, and where and when the real world gets converted into the romantic is difficult to say, but a thin partition divides the two planes of existence in the Tailor's Needle. Thus, Professor Sharma. At the end of the novel, the public, Mr. Ranbakshi, comes back again to the public forum. He starts as a public man, as I pointed out, the Chief Secretary to the Maharaja of Kashinagar, comes back to Mirzapur where he is a harried father and a worried husband. And then at the end of the novel, he must again face society. But this time, he must take a stance and support the new progressive world which is being born painfully from within the wombs of the old.